Welcome to WTAE Listens. I'm Janelle Hall. This morning we're looking at what's to come in 2024 in Pittsburgh, from the economy to politics to the new things that are happening in the Steel City. A new year means a new start, new challenges, and new opportunities. A fresh start as we begin 2024. From an economic standpoint, our region was in decent shape leaving 2023.
Not everyone appreciates we are at an extremely low unemployment rate. This has been under 3.5%. These are rates of unemployment that the Pittsburgh region has not seen since the 1960s, maybe the early 1970s.
I spoke with a local economist about what some of the biggest focuses over the next year will be. Plus, Pennsylvania bracing for its spotlight moment as a swing state in the battle for the White House.
When you have a state like Pennsylvania, where we have multiple seats up in these areas, it can really help tilt the balance of power.
I also went one-on-one with a local political expert and analyst about the political climate ahead and big things happening in the Steel City, sure to draw in new visitors in 2024.
We want to see what people that are coming to Pittsburgh, what do they know about Pittsburgh, and what is kind of that hidden gem.
I talk with Visit Pittsburgh about the exciting year ahead for Pittsburgh. It's a top topic, especially as we continue to rebound from the pandemic. We're talking about the economy, the job market, financial stability, or the prospect of work and income. I sat down with Chris Bream, a local economist, to get a sense of where we're heading. Let's talk about the economy here in Pittsburgh. What are some things that you think people should keep an eye on that may be some indicators of how things will be going in the new year?
Well, let's talk about where we're at right now. I think not everyone appreciates we are at an extremely low unemployment rate. This has been under 3.5%. These are rates of unemployment that the Pittsburgh region has not seen since the 1960s, maybe the early 1970s. So hiring is very difficult. I think the challenges going forward for the next year will be in sort of how local workers and local employers sort of navigate this very new environment where unemployment rate is low here and also low across the country, the places that we're competing with.
So when we talk about different challenges for the county, I know the new county executive, Sarah Innamorato, mentioned in her inaugural address that the county's post-pandemic recovery has been slow. What kind of strides do you see the county making? What do you think needs to happen in order to kind of get that ball rolling a little bit more?
I think it's challenging. I think you got to manage expectations. I think here in Pennsylvania, counties don't necessarily have a lot of tools to change the shape. It's a regional economy. There's 7 counties, 8 counties in the metropolitan area. I think they all come together sort of to shape the competitiveness of the region. And a lot of the tools that shape the economy really are sort of at the national level, at the state level, even more so even at the municipal level. So I think the county executive can do a lot of things, but it's still going to be very challenging to sort of shift on a dime. I don't think that's necessarily in her power in the near term.
What do you think the biggest thing to focus on, or top 2 things to focus on in the new year should be for these leaders in the region?
I think workforce is probably the biggest issue. I think we need to sort of learn how to compete in this world where unemployment is not just low here, but elsewhere. And that's not been true for a long time. Pittsburgh has been a place that has not had a lot of job growth in a long time. So I think a lot of local employers have not had to compete and hire workers from elsewhere, had to retain workers when there's so much competition for workers from all these regions that we're competing with all the time. And so I would sort of focus on sort of getting our workers competitive in that workforce space more than anything else.
How has the pandemic impacted some of these issues that you're talking about that we're still seeing today?
So, I think the nation had to, the world's had to sort of bounce back from COVID. I think the shifts in COVID, hopefully we've moved on beyond the pandemic a little bit, hopefully it's not coming back, but this shift toward working from home and remote work has really sort of changed the way the workforce works. So some people say we can compete and have workers who live in Pittsburgh and work elsewhere, but it also works the other way around, that we now have all these great workers here, one of our great strengths, that employers around the world are able to sort of tap into now. So it works both ways, and I think that shifts, that COVID shift also impacts downtown, also impacts our employment centers, where places where we're used to going to work 9 to 5 probably aren't going to be shaped the same way that they were for decades, if not forever.
Yeah, you have employers used to having people come to the office all the time. They're paying to rent the space.
Yeah.
And now people are begging to work from home.
And I think, again, this tight labor force means workers can expect that. I mean, not all workers, but I think that's sort of an amenity, if you think, that workers are able to ask for. So there will clearly be some shifts in where people work, in our commuting patterns. And certainly, again, downtown Pittsburgh has been tremendously successful at retaining workers for a century, but it's probably not going to have the same density of jobs down there that it has for many decades.
We're talking about jobs. 2023 brought the announcement that U.S. Steel will now be purchased by a company based out of Japan. In your view, what were some of the underlying issues that prompted the sale, and what do you believe is ahead for U.S. Steel?
Well, I'll say up front, I don't think we all know. I don't think the details of what Nippon will do if they're the final purchaser of U.S. Steel will do, and will they keep the jobs here? Will they keep the headquarters jobs here? We don't know. I think any purchaser of U.S. Steel is probably going to look towards some consolidation. I mean, so there won't be the jobs that are there now. But the truth is, there's maybe a couple thousand, maybe 3,000 at most U.S. Steel jobs. This is down from 200,000 or 300,000 jobs, decades ago. So I mean, it's a very small fraction of what people seem to remember in terms of the steel industry. And I think a lot of them will be here. They're not going to spend that money to shut down the plants. But again, it's not going to be as big as it was.
So we hear companies talk about high-paying manufacturing jobs that go unfilled in our region. Many of these positions do not require a college education, so it's like that shift in finding different ways to advance past high school. How do you think our region is doing when it comes to attracting good candidates to fill these jobs, and how can maybe school districts partner with some of these places of employment to help with jobs?
And this goes with the challenge of the workforce issues. Workers have more and more options than they've ever had in the past at these low unemployment rates. So, a worker can choose many paths. And so all workers, not just manufacturing workers, workforces, employers are going to have to find ways to make these jobs, the jobs that people really want. They're not going to be forced into a job that they might have been in the past. And whether high paying or not, I think there's sort of a lot of opportunities for people to sort of maximize their income, whether here or elsewhere. And again, that's the challenge. We need to find ways to make sure people have those opportunities here or want to stay here for the long term.
We appreciate your insight, and we look forward to all that's in store for Allegheny County and Pittsburgh in the new year. Still ahead.
We're always a bellwether state that's really important in the final election outcomes.
19 valuable electoral votes up for grabs in 2024, Pennsylvania's role in this year's presidential election. Welcome back. Now that 2024 is here, so is the next presidential elections. We're also going to be talking about the congressional and Senate races here in Pennsylvania. I spoke with Dr. Kristen Kupe, the director of pre-law at Duquesne University, about the political year ahead. Let's start with the race for the White House. How do you think Pennsylvania is going to play a role? At this point, it looks like it's going to be a Biden-Trump. Anything could happen. But let's talk about some of the key things that you're watching and talking with your students about.
I mean, the first thing is going to be who the Republican nominee is. We're pretty certain Biden will be the Democratic nominee, but given all the uncertainty with Trump's ballot access and the charges he's facing right now, he still has a ton of support with his electorate. And so we're looking at probably a potential rematch. One other important thing is going to be who he picks for his vice presidential nominee. So kind of sifting through the Republican candidates between Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, but Pennsylvania is going to have a really important role in this with our primary helping select the candidates a little bit earlier than in past years. And we're always a bellwether state that's really important in the final election outcomes.
When you talk to your students, I remember being with you on election night 2020. How do you explain that year and, compared to what we can expect? How does that prepare you for election years and years to come?
It's been interesting because with college students, it's really one of the first elections that they paid attention to and could actually participate in. Even if they couldn't, they were still really well aware of what was going on in the country, the issues, the candidates themselves. And so they have a little bit of knowledge of who Biden and Trump are, their time in office, and they're starting to make judgments about these things and realize how what the presidents do affects them in their everyday lives and in their future lives.
Let's talk about some other key local races in the congressional race. Tell me what people should watch for. It sounds like this could be another close race.
Oh, there's a lot of really interesting congressional races this year, especially in Pennsylvania. So as you know, every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives is up for re-election. So locally, we're going to have probably a pretty interesting race in Pennsylvania 17 with Chris Deluzio. There's word that Rob Mercuri, Republican candidate from years past, is going to be his challenger. We have Summer Lee up for re-election already in Pennsylvania 12. And so we're going to see probably a lot of money, a lot of ads for them starting in the next couple weeks as they begin to get their campaigns ready for the primaries. And then for the United States Senate, a third of those seats are up, and one of those is in Pennsylvania with Bob Casey, who announced his reelection and is facing what we hear to be a potential challenger from McCormick, who ran against Fetterman a couple years ago. So probably a lot of national attention on our state for some of these races, especially the Senate race, because of how tight the numbers are for control there.
Why is that national attention so important for both sides, and what are the implications if something tilts one way or the other nationally?
So the balance of power is really close in both houses of Congress right now. Only about 7 seats separate the Democrats and Republicans in the House of Representatives, and the Senate is even closer. So moving 1 seat from a Democrat to a Republican control or vice versa can have a big impact on who actually controls the chamber, which controls legislative agenda, the laws that are being introduced and passed or not passed. And so a lot of the legislative gridlock, some of the infighting we've seen in the parties, and I mean, we all maybe remember what happened with the speaker election and trying to figure out who's going to lead the Republicans. So 1 seat can matter a lot. And when you have a state like Pennsylvania, where we have multiple seats up in these areas, it can really help tilt the balance of power.
What are some of the key issues that you think will be tackled in 2024, or the key issues that political leaders on both sides are going to be trying to come to an agreement on in the state?
I mean, in the state, it's always the issues that affect voters the most, and they're pretty consistent through every election. Economics, how people are dealing with inflation, what's in their pocketbooks, how much they're spending on things. Education is going to be a big issue. Energy, a lot of those types of issues, social issues as well. So they're pretty consistent over time. We're going to see pretty much the same things at the national level. Whether or not people are satisfied with the economy. We're also going to be going into another round of potential government shutdowns in the next couple weeks over the federal budget. And then even bigger issues like what's going on in Israel and international issues, what's going on in Iran, still the war in Ukraine. So all of these issues are going to be on people's minds, but really people usually vote in their own self-interest to do what's going to be best for them.
And some of the things that you may be noticing at home are the additional commercials coming a little bit sooner. So let's a quick reminder before we go about the primary date and how they're going to start seeing those yard signs, those commercials, probably sooner than we typically would.
Right. So April 23rd is the new Pennsylvania primary date, which means within the next 30 days before the election, we're going to see more very repetitive ads. There's probably going to be a lot of money coming in from outside groups, from the campaigns themselves, and they're going to spend a lot of money trying to get people's attention, making sure they know that there's a new primary date, when to vote, and highlighting for the incumbents, what they've done over the last 2 or 4 years or however long they've been in office. But you're going to start seeing all of the signs letting you know that the campaigns are gearing up and that it's almost time to vote again.
Still ahead.
These concerts are a big deal for travel and tourism. So a big lineup happening for 2024.
The good times roll in 2024. What's on the entertainment calendar for us in this new year here in the Pittsburgh region? Welcome back. Some exciting things are in store for the Pittsburgh region in 2024. Everything from new events, concerts, sports, and travel. I had the chance to talk with Emily Hatfield with Visit Pittsburgh about the loaded schedule that includes something for everyone. Let's talk about travel in general, Visit Pittsburgh. What are some of the things that we're seeing this year and what we're excited to look forward to?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we're most excited about is that travel is back to Pittsburgh. So 2023, we're still crunching those final numbers, but we're hoping it's going to be the first year that surpasses 2019 levels. So a lot of good momentum coming into travel post-pandemic, and we hope to continue that in 2024. Travel is big business here in Pittsburgh. It's about a $6.5 billion industry. It supports 40,000 tourism-supported jobs, and we see about 20 million visitors to Allegheny County every year. So a lot of exciting momentum. We hope to grow each of those numbers in the new year.
It's interesting. What are some of the big things to look forward to?
Yeah, so definitely for the new year, we're leaning into arts and culture. So we always are doing our visitation studies. We want to see what people that are coming to Pittsburgh, what do they know about Pittsburgh, and what is kind of that hidden gem. And we find that arts and culture is really what people come here to discover and to enjoy. So we're definitely going to be leaning into that. That's a big piece of the tourism development plan, is how can we expand those initiatives? How can we put together more itinerary-based marketing for folks looking for arts and culture? And a lot of exciting anniversaries that are going to be happening on the arts and culture front. It's the 30th anniversary of the Andy Warhol Museum this year, and that museum is kind of the flagship of the tourism industry. We see about 150,000 visitors to that museum internationally and nationally every year. So really taking the arts and culture story and telling it in a unique way for 2024.
We think about entertainment, and right away so many people think about the Taylor Swift concert. If you want to know how many hotels we had here in the Pittsburgh area, those all filled up quickly.
Yeah.
Anything that we can look forward to from a concert standpoint or entertainment standpoint of that magnitude, or anything just in general for people to watch?
So I think that Taylor Swift Eras Tour was a great example for us to really lean into how much impact concerts have on travel and tourism. So her tour alone brought in $46 million in direct spending, 145,000 attendees, 80% of which were from out of town. So we really use that as an example as we look into the new year to see these concerts are a big deal for travel and tourism. So a big lineup happening for 2024, starting with Madonna in February. Then we have Andrea Bocelli in April, and then fan favorite Kenny Chesney is returning to Pittsburgh in June. So a lot of different genres on the summer concert series that are going to be coming to Pittsburgh, and we're so excited for that impact and using concerts not only for residents but to draw out-of-town visitors here as well.
And of course, we can't talk about Pittsburgh without sports, right? So on the sports front, besides the big teams, Pirates, Steelers, Penguins, what are some other things that we can watch for?
Yeah, so I hope I'm the first one to say get your brackets ready, because March Madness is coming back to Pittsburgh. So starting at the end of March, I believe it's March 21st and 23rd, Pittsburgh at PPG Paints Arena is going to be hosting the NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Championship, first and second round. So very excited for that. A couple months later, we have the Pittsburgh Marathon returning. So we're very excited for the sports culture that we're fortunate to have here in Pittsburgh. And on the Visit Pittsburgh side, our strategy for 2024 is really figuring out how can we retain and enhance those repeat events, those fan favorites, while also growing our sports base to include new and emerging sports. We want to position Pittsburgh as the leader for rugby, boys volleyball, and events that really utilize our rivers like fishing and boating. So keep in mind that those repeat events are going to be coming, but we'll also have new and emerging sports events here as well.
It's so exciting. And also, a lot of Pittsburghers love to travel, so they keep an eye on different flights, different places where we can travel, but you have a different perspective. It's also about once those certain flights open up, who can come into town. So let's talk about some of the areas that have opened up and your strategy to try to attract more people to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so Pittsburgh is very fortunate that we've had the British Airways flight as a direct nonstop to the UK market for some time now, but also happening in 2024 is the expansion with our new flight to Iceland. So direct flight to Iceland, it will be happening starting in mid-May. So like you mentioned, it's a great opportunity for Pittsburghers to go and connect to the greater Europe area, but we look at it as positioning Pittsburgh as another gateway for international travelers to come here. So we're very excited about that. With those two direct flights, we'll now have direct connection across the Atlantic every day of the week for both residents and international travelers to come to Pittsburgh. So we're so excited for that flight. The airport has done a tremendous job at really growing that base, and we're excited to see the impact that that flight's going to have, I believe, from May to October of this year.
And real quick before we go, talk about Astrobotics. And for people who aren't familiar with this gem on Pittsburgh's north side, how you're trying to capitalize on that in terms of tourism and education for people.
Yeah, so we're really seeing that Pittsburgh is becoming a leader, technology, innovation, software, AI, and we're seeing those trends resonate with travelers as well. Travelers know that Pittsburgh is a leader in these things. When they come to Pittsburgh, they want to experience them firsthand. So the exciting project coming out of Astrobotic is actually going to be happening in just a couple days. I believe it leaves, but it was in conjunction with the new Moonshot Museum, which is also on the north side. The next lunar lander to take place and to land on the moon since the Apollo missions was built right here in Pittsburgh thanks to Astrobotic, and because of the Moonshot Museum, travelers could see this being built firsthand. So floor-to-ceiling windows, kids, multi-generation families got to see this incredible historic moment being built right here, and our fingers are crossed it's going to land on the moon at the end of February. So great strides being made here in Pittsburgh.
You're watching WTAE Listens. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. No matter where you live in the Pittsburgh region, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what's wrong and what's right so we can listen. You can send us an email at WTAListens@hearst.com. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. We hope you have a great week.